Hey everyone. We're going to give it just a couple minutes to let folks fill into the virtual room so that we can get this kicked off. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, why don't you pop your name, what organization you represent, what you do, and where you're watching from in the chat box. Hey everyone, looks like we have a nice little diversity of folks, mostly California. For everyone who's just joined, we're giving it one more minute to let more folks join into the room. Feel free to introduce yourself, where you're watching from. Thus far, all US. That's great. Ah, so many places. We've got Puerto Rico in here. All right, great, everyone. Well, I'm going to let people continue to trickle in, and please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat box. But I want to get us kick-started here. So, hi, I'm Sophie. I'm the community manager at Project FoundED. I think a lot of you, are in the Project FoundED community already, but for folks who aren't, just to let you know, we're a community of EdTech founders. We believe that technology's role is to deliver equitable learning outcomes for all learners. And, we've come together to support founders with this goal. I popped this information in the chat, but you can join us at projectfounded.org. We've been doing a summer series of events, particularly focused on, sales and fundraising for the EdTech community, and really excited to bring this one here with Rupak and TurboSBIR. So this is going to be a focus on non-dilutive fundraising and funding from the government. Rupak's got an amazing company that he's built out and was recommended to us by a FoundED founder. So super happy to have him here presenting. And just to fill everyone on flow for today, he's going to present for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to take Q&A. But all right, I'll hand over the reins now.
Thank you so much, Sophie. It's super awesome to be part of this. I mean, I'm just looking at all the places where folks are from. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty much across the country and even internationally. I see someone from the UK. I have a special place for England in my heart, and you'll see in a minute why. And also, I saw someone from Canada. We actually have a couple of folks from Canada. It's great. It's so cool. So very, very happy to be part of this community and to share what I know about the space, what I think, my opinions, for whatever they're worth, for anybody. And help all you guys as much as I can. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and let me know if you can't see it, but it should all be fine, I think. Full screen presentation should be visible to everybody. So the company's name is OmniSync, and I'm the CEO of it and co-founder. We started the company back in 2019. So it's been a great ride, a year and a half or so. What we initially started doing was we basically did a lot of due diligence on small businesses and startups, trying to see what their pain points were, because my co-founder and I have been in startups before. And so we wanted to do something with our company that kind of helps them in some way. And so when we did our due diligence, what we found was that most of the early companies were really struggling to get anything done because of the lack of funds. And the funding at that stage is always a chicken and egg scenario, where you go to people who have money, They want to see something real, but it's hard to do something real without the money. And so we wanted to see that if we could do something to cut through that cycle, the chicken and egg cycle. And so because of our backgrounds, we knew about government funding available to precisely that stage of company where there's a little bit of a high risk involved in building the product in the first place. And so nobody else would fund it. And that's where governments are actually incentivized to come in and support those sorts of efforts. And so our due diligence led us to believe that there was a significant gap in the market for finding, accessing, and applying and getting these sorts of grants and contracts from the government. So we set out on a mission to basically create the first TurboTax, if you will, for this industry, where now you don't have to go out and hunt for a consultant to help you out who would charge you thousands of dollars, which kind of defeats the whole purpose, of going after money that you don't have. And so we tried and made it more democratized for most founders to do it in a very affordable manner. And so our platform is called OmniSync to combine various sources of grants and contracts and SBIRs from various places in the governments, various agencies. We bring it all into one place. So it's like, one ring to bind them all, is what we jokingly say. So I told you why I have a special place in my heart for England, and that's because I did my grad school there. So I did my master's in Manchester, went to Cambridge to do a PhD. And I've been trained in biomedical sciences in the academic sense. So I came out here to UCSD to do a postdoc at Scripps and UCSD. And then by the end of that, I was basically choosing whether to go all professorial, with academia, or to go into the big bad world of industry. And I chose to join the startup InhibRx, which I was employee number 29 or something at the time. And then the 3.5 years that I was there, we actually went public at the end of that, and we grew to over 100 people. So it was very cool to be part of that growth phase of a company like that. And then alongside that, I've had startups in the past more as side gigs. So the Swasthya company was a side gig in India, which got acquired in a year or so. And then Arena Sciences was a side gig out of San Diego when we were at UC San Diego, interestingly, with my current co-founder, Norman. And that had reasonable success in retail, where we sold to places like the Levi Stadium and the defense markets. And so OmniSync is actually my first company running it full time, both for Norman and myself as a startup. And we've done fairly well so far, where we've been able to get some money from investors, pretty high profile ones. And also we've been able to get grants and contracts for ourselves as well. And so we kind of talk the talk, and walk the walk pretty much of what we preach. And so we're here trying to help you guys out to do the same thing. So what we'll talk about today is how and where to find funding opportunities, because that's, I think, one of the big pain points that most people have, because the internet is a wild place where you can get lost. We'll talk about a little bit about how to write a good proposal to any of these opportunities, because generally they have pretty similar elements. And then that leads me to telling you a little bit about tips and tricks for how to really win this game. So the first, section about where to find funding opportunities, I'll mostly tell you about all the free sources available, because there are a couple of paid options out there for people, but then again, we feel that that's again starts to defeat the purpose, because if you're trying to shell out money straight off the bat, even to find something cool to apply for generally means that you're pretty well off, if you have that kind of money to spend. So at least I'd like to, publicize more of the free resources at that stage, because you can do it yourself by spending a little bit of time. And when you don't have money, you have time generally, right? If you don't have, it's that it goes the other way. When you get more busy with lots of business, that means you have money and less time. So there are three sources I'll tell you about. First one are federal sources, where you search for opportunities across the whole federal space. And there's two places where you do it. You do it if you want to search for grant opportunities, you go to grants.gov. The website is a little dated. Functionality features are a little messy because it's a government website, but it is what it is. And it's a federally wide database of grant opportunities. And for contracts, you go to sam.gov. which is where you get contract opportunities. Now, for people who don't know, there's a key difference between a grant and a contract. A grant is basically for investigator-initiated work. So you are basically pitching an idea to an agency saying that, look, this is what we think should be built. This is why we think it should be built. And this is the impact it's going to make. And then the agency decides if it's within their mission to fund the development of that area of research or not, or product development or whatever, or not. And then they fund you based on that. And you get most of the money upfront because it's work that you're proposing to do, as something that you've initiated yourself. A contract is where the agencies are typically looking for something specific that they want to use in some way or the other. And they're basically putting out a solicitation for people to bid and propose on how they will deliver on that contract with different milestones. And so there it's more like you're proposing capabilities of your organization to them, and then they evaluate whether you're capable of delivering what they really want to acquire in some way and use in some way. And so there you get payments based on milestones and deliverables and not all upfront. So there's a key difference between the two things. And depending on the kind of company you are, you may opt for one or the other or both. And there are some borderline cases as well where it fits into both a grant and a contract in terms of how they're structured. But that's important for all of you to know in terms of like what you are as a company, what you're proposing. Does that fit a grant kind of mechanism or does that fit a contract mechanism? The second source are agency-specific websites. This is where if you know which agency you're working with, then you could go into their website and there's always a section that highlights the funding opportunities currently available and even from the past from that specific agency. Now, why is this important? Now, most of these agencies also eventually will push their funding opportunities out to the federal databases, the grants.gov and sam.gov. But there seems to be a timing lag between the two. And so the agencies will push things out first on their websites generally, especially the bigger ones. And then the federal databases pull information from there. And so there's a time lag, and that's why things appear first on the agency-specific websites. The agency-specific websites also have links to other places on their website for additional information and resources. So sometimes it makes sense to find something on the federal databases and then go to the agency's website, find the same one, and then see where it links to find more stuff, more relevant stuff pertaining to that solicitation. And then the third source is for small businesses only. And this is for the SBIR, STTR kind of mechanism. That SBIRs are small business innovation research grants. STTR is essentially a sister program from there. And it's meant for small businesses. It's a set aside for small businesses. So nonprofits, universities cannot even apply for SBIRs and STTRs as a lead. So, and those are available on sbir.gov. All the solicitations and funding opportunities are all available there to search through. And they will also eventually feed into the federal databases, but there can be a time lag. There can also be a difference in the number of, in the topics, separated out better on sbir.gov versus on grants.gov or sam.gov. There, the federal databases may only host the parent solicitation and not the breakdown of each topic within that solicitation. And so for more granularity, you might want to go to sbir.gov if you're a small business looking for a small business innovation grant or a contract. And then because all this stuff is in all sorts of places, on our side, our company has actually gone in and taken the task of bringing it all into one place and making it easier for people to navigate. And because we believe in the same mission as like I said before, we've actually made this completely free for people to use, and there's no credit card even required to actually use it. So you can go on there and start using it pretty much anytime without entering any payment information at all. And we've also added a feature which is novel, which doesn't exist anywhere else at this point, which is where we actually have an AI algorithm in place as well that takes bios of whatever you're working on put in a blurb that you have an idea for. And it actually scours through the 10,000 plus opportunity, the 100,000 plus opportunities that are available, and shortlists that down to 10 that score the highest on our algorithm. It's not perfect, but so far we've actually seen about 5 to 7 hits almost every time we've done something like this out of the 10 that seem very promising for all of our companies and all of our users, including ourselves internally. So again, free to use, and you can go ahead and use it. And just for an example, I have this 7th generation games company that I recently met at a conference where we were doing a panel together, and they've been successful with NIH and NSF kind of and USDA kind of funding for EdTech. So it was pretty relevant for all you guys. They have a nice software for helping kids develop better math scores. And so they were able to get some nice opportunities that they actually didn't even know about, that these existed. And if you do keyword searches, these don't always show up. And so that's why the AI algorithm is pretty powerful to pick out those sorts of opportunities that have contextual relevance to what you're working on. So go ahead and you can use that. And you can also set email alerts for yourselves from our app as well, and all free to use. So lots of resources for you guys to find new funding opportunities. Now, some more tips on how to make sure you stay on top of new solicitations. Every agency out there has a mailing list. Every grant search engine out there most likely has a mailing, RSS feed that you can sign up for. So that way, at least you get hit with new opportunities as and how they're showing up on the websites. And we have that too. The other thing that you can do, which is not as intuitive for most people and it's kind of scary sometimes, is you can get on speaking terms with the POs, the program officers at the various agencies, because sometimes if they get more familiarity with what you're working on, they can often recommend you sources and solicitations that may be in the works on their side, or they might know a buddy in some other agency that's looking for something because he had coffee with that person someday or whatever. So it's always nice to be on that sort of relationship building effort with a program officer, because they can really help you identify the right opportunity, and also they can give you some feedback on whether this is like whether you have a half chance for even going for something, right? Or they might tell you that, look, you're really lacking in XYZ. Before you get that, don't bother applying or something like that, right? So and we also help with stuff like that. So try and do that. And then lastly, like I said, I always keep saying it, get all the free help that you can get. There are SBDCs all across the nation. There are PTACs, and there are incubators all across the country. We partner with a lot of these organizations already, and we serve as the back end for them to serve all their clients. And because they pay for it, all their clients get it for free from us. So it's a very cool thing that you guys can avail. And if you don't have, if you want to work with us, and if you contact one of these organizations, and then you can always make an intro, and I can kind of create that partnership with them, and that way at least you can still get that stuff for free. Okay. All right. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about specific agencies and what they're offering at this point, at least, and they've been doing that over the past couple of years. This could be redundant for some of you who may already know, but it could be new for some folks, and there's some information in here that could be new as well. So first up, Department of Education. It's an EdTech community, so it's probably not rocket science that you'll think about Department of Education. They have an SBIR program for small businesses. The solicitation, it only appears once a year in January, and as soon as it gets posted, you have a 30-day window to submit something. So that deadline is very, very fast. So it's only for those organizations that are on top of the solicitation, where they know exactly it's going to come out here. I'm going to have 30 days. Let me, basically prepare everything else ahead of time and apply. And here's why it's important. Some of the registrations that you need to get done to even be eligible to apply for an SBIR sometimes can take 4 to 6 weeks. So imagine you looked at the solicitation in the first week or second week after it came out. Now you have 20 days. Now you've got to get registrations that would anyways take 4 to 6 weeks. And now you've passed the deadline. And now you've got to wait for 1 full year. So it's only for those sorts of organizations that kind of already know that this is going to happen. So this is where folks like us can really help you out to make sure that's in your pipeline, right? And you do everything needed to do to get competitive when the solicitation hits the market. And the rest of the information is pretty much on the slide there. You can read it, but it's a good amount of money for a phase 1 for feasibility work. And then you can basically be eligible for a phase 2, which is more for prototyping, testing, implementation, all that stuff. And it's a fair amount of work that needs to get put in terms of the write-up and the admin docs that need to get put together. But here's the rub, right? It's a really small program with a small budget. And so hundreds of companies will apply, to this program, but they only have budget for 15 awards, or sometimes fewer. Like the last few years, they've even given out few awards. So it's highly, highly competitive, this particular program. But it's one of those things that you would just do as an EdTech company, because you never know who's going to read it, if they like it a lot compared to everything else they've read, and they might select you amongst those 15 or 20 that's going to win. Right. So it's kind of like VC funding, where the chances are like 1%, 10%, whatever, of getting it. But there are other programs where your chances are much, much higher. So NSF is the other program. The NSF actually runs 365 days a year. There are no deadlines as such. So you can pretty much submit any day, anytime. Not anytime, any day. There's time windows. But phase 1, again, it's a good amount of money. It's for feasibility work. Same kind of documentation required in terms of volume of material. But they have some recent changes in priorities. The point I wanted to make on this slide is that the NSF actually awards hundreds of these grants every year. So your chances actually are fairly decent. Now, when it comes to EdTech, there's been a little bit of a shakeup in the NSF. For those people who might not know, they used to have a specific program within the NSF SPR program for education technologies. Then what happens is there were companies who won their phase 1s in that program, and then now they were applying for phase 2s. And all of them got denied. And everyone was like, what the heck happened here, right? So what happened was they actually had a change in priority within the NSF. And what they found was that a lot of previous companies that they had funded in the EdTech space, they developed technologies, but they never got to the point where they were actually moving the needle for the actual educational outcomes for the individuals. And so they were making great tech and building all these gizmos and gadgets and all that. But if you looked at the outcome in terms of, did the student do better? Did the college kids do better or whatever? That wasn't being tracked, measured right. And so the impact was just not there. And so they took a hard decision of basically scrubbing the program. And so what then happened was there was a massive uproar from everywhere. And they were like, what the heck is going on? There are phase 1 companies and we've already shown that this works. What are you talking about and all that stuff? And so then what happened was that the NSF went in and they kind of revisited that crazy decision. And now what they've done is they actually have a program that's called Learning and Cognition Technologies. And so see how they've changed even the wording of it to make sure that people understand that this is really designed to help learning and not just ed tech, right? Yes, you can build the tech and you're required to build tech, but you really have to make sure that the learning outcomes are being met. That's what they really are going to judge you on. And so now they have a program that's specific for EdTech companies, but with a very, very specific focus on technologies that will actually affect outcomes. Okay. And then now some of the other agencies, which most people might not even know that they fund EdTech, that's basically the Department of Defense, right? So they fund EdTech in various ways. The largest one being they want to continuously educate all their personnel on processes, equipment usage, weapons usage, capabilities of various infrastructure, things that they have, all that stuff. It's a constant exercise. Think about it like essentially integrating education as a piece of HR, like for them, right? They bring new people on, new cadets, joining Air Force Academy or whatever. They come into the workforce within the Air Force and they don't know crap about what's going on in any where they are being posted. And so they have a lot of focus on those sorts of technologies that can very rapidly help educate personnel within various components of the defense ecosystem, be it Army, Navy, Air Force, DHA, all sorts of DARP, all sorts of agencies within the overall defense ecosystem. And so these are some of the examples of the kinds of things that have been either solicited. So this was an Army solicitation in July this year, which was due in July this year. for supporting tutoring. And then this was a company, Growth Engine, that kind of is also an EdTech company that supports training for personnel. And that was awarded, a phase 2 very recently. And this is just one of the examples of many, many companies that have been funded in the EdTech space from the Air Force. One point I want to make here is the Air Force actually has the largest volume of phase 1 awards that it gives out every throughout the year across all agencies. They're also the most progressive in the sense that their application process is actually the easiest by far to go through. I call it like the gateway SBIR, into beginning to look at SBIR kind of funding. And so almost every single company should throw in a phase 1 application to the Air Force because it's an open front door that they have. And you essentially pitch to them why it's important for the Air Force to require technology like you guys. And it's a very easy application that everyone should just submit. Essentially, it's a slide deck that you prepare as opposed to any like massive amounts of written material. And we're going to be running a program for Air Force as well. So if you want to work with us, then feel free to reach out. Okay, and then finally, NIH. Actually, not finally, but NIH is so National Institute of Health. Again, like an agency which typically most people would not think that they fund EdTech, but here's a solicitation that's open right now that's funding EdTech, but specifically on basically a specific demographic, which is pre-college. And they are focused on informal ways of educating the audiences on various scientific and STEM kind of concepts. And because they've and if you think about NIH, it's basically an institute made up of doctors and biological life sciences scientists. And so typically they've not been like, they don't think about informal science education much, but there has been a recent shift in many agencies where they are starting to understand that unless you break it down in an easy manner and you're going after really early, kids at an earlier stage, it's going to be hard for you to inculcate, those sorts of concepts later on in life. Like, for example, you can think about how understanding, chemistry, organic chemistry, for example, there's a window of time where if you miss that, then you'll never be good at organic chemistry, if you don't grasp at that time. And so that's kind of, they're really trying to zero in on those sorts of technologies that can access and hit the right people at the right time to kind of foster that sort of education for them. And then just very quick word about kind of SBIR kind of funding. So this is for all other sorts of organizations, could be larger companies, could be nonprofits, could be researchers at universities, colleges, could be small businesses, but not working on highly innovative kind of projects. They could be working on something like a service to provide. There's a bunch of grants and contracts for pretty much everyone in the education space. So on the left, again, an example of the NSF. If you go into their education program, they right now have about 100 open solicitations for you to apply to, right? And they're all for EdTech and open to other kinds of organizations that don't have to be small businesses. You can be, but you don't have to be. And then on the right is our search engine, where you can actually check for contracts or grants or whatever. And SBIR is a separate bucket, but you can filter out contracts and grants. And right now for contracts alone, for the word education, I see 1,000 opportunities that you can go through, right? So everything from like senior education to all sorts of things that you can go into depending on your tech. So lots of other kinds of mechanisms as well. Doesn't have to be small business innovation kind of, buckets of money. All right, so now that hopefully you found a solicitation that's a good fit, hopefully you found multiple and you have a pipeline of things to apply to, how do you start writing, right? How do you start preparing a good proposal? So the first thing you've got to remember is that unless your proposal fits what the agency's mission is and what they're looking for, depending on whether it's a grant or a contract, no matter how well you write it, no matter how good you are as a company, you're not going to win, right? And so the fit is the most important thing to even begin to address some of these agencies. So that's what we in the industry call responsiveness to a solicitation. So I asked you about how you can get in touch with the program officers at various agencies. This is where they can really help you. This is where folks like us can also really help you, right? Because we've seen so many of these go through various different ways. And so we can kind of have a good, pulse for what might work and what might not work with a particular agency. But that's a key point for you guys to consider. Sometimes I can also tell you that this is a little bit muddy. So what the agency puts out is not always what they're looking for. And they've just put it out because they got rushed or they were mandated to do it a certain way or whatever. And so at that times, you've just got to take it with a grain of salt. And that's why some industry insights from folks who've done it before or whatever can really help, right? To read in between the lines or something. The next part is really to understand which parts of your proposal are being read by what sort of people and with what intent, right? So the assumption that many people proposing these things have is that, oh yeah, I'll basically write out the full thing and someone who's going to review it will do a good job of reading everything and then making a judgment call. Doesn't happen, right? The proposal gets passed around to lots of different places. And so, and they're all tasked with a specific thing to read and score within that proposal. And so, for example, a summary is not something that's going to be read in detail by someone whose job is to read the remaining portion of your proposal in detail, because their assumption is that, yeah, I'll read the proposal. I don't need to read the summary because I'll get the summary if I read the full proposal anyway. And on the other side, like, the folks who are reading summaries, they aren't technical experts in your field, or may not be. For the most part, they're not. And so if you put in a bunch of like really deep tech jargon in there, they might not even understand what you're trying to do. And they might either assign it to the wrong reviewer or, basically pass it on just because they're like, I don't know what they're doing. I couldn't make head or tail of that or whatever. So you need to know when to touch on really deep concepts and when to keep it moonshot-ish, right? Like what's the ultimate golden goose here that we're trying to get? So you have to remember that there's different parts of the proposal that serve different purposes, and so write them accordingly. Right? The third one is a lot of people get fazed by the fact that it seems that various parts of the proposal, they all seem to be asking for around the same thing. That what the heck's going on? Why am I just copy pasting stuff from here and there? And there's a reason for that. And the reason is exactly the same that I just mentioned, that not everything is read by everyone. And so you have to give yourself the best chance that if you have a really important thing to say and to make sure that people read it, then you put it in multiple places to give the person the best chance of finding it, right? The right person to find it. And so it is very normal to have repeated information at various places. You word it differently in various places, but at the end, all you're doing is giving it the best chance of being read by the right person, right? If that person is going to choose to read one thing or the other, then at least you've given it your best shot. And finally, and this is one of the most difficult things for people to do, especially if they're not experienced, is in your proposal, how do you propose something that doesn't come across as beaten to death, right? Boring or whatever, is somewhat interesting. At the same time, you don't propose something that it would take a mountain to move to actually make it work, because then they're going to be like, okay, this is way too risky for us to even consider, because you'll just be a money sink or whatever. And so that's the line you've got to be able to draw and balance your proposal to what the agency's appetite for risk is. And that's where you've got to know what the agency is looking for. Are they looking for super high risk stuff? Are they looking for stuff that's close to almost done, and so they can be safe in giving you the money or whatever? So that's where, getting some insights from people who've done this in the past, or getting in contact with the program officers and they can tell you what they're looking for, etc., helps a lot. And then I think I have an example that I can show you, especially like I wanted to make sure that you guys understand how the implementation of EdTech is really important in a proposal nowadays. Without that, proposals just aren't being funded. If you just show tech development and no way to actually assess the outcomes on education, that's kind of, it's not working. So I have an example that I can show in a little bit to you guys. And then finally, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some tips and tricks of how to win, right? And the first one is a tip that you're not going to like because it involves work. And most people are just by definition, there's way too much to do always. And so work is something that people are trying to minimize at all times, but it's just the nature of the game, right? It's very similar to fundraising with investors. If you've done that, you know that you don't pitch to one investor and sit around and wait. You basically pitch to hundreds of investors to maybe get 10 to listen to you, and maybe one that maybe will fund you. Applying for grants and contracts is no different. It is door-to-door sales. You don't know which one's going to be a good fit with you. You can increase your chances, but by and large, you have no control over who's going to review your proposal and what mood they're going to be in and what they've seen in the past to make a judgment call on whether they like what you're proposing or not. And so we did the study with all the past companies that have been successful winners of the SBIR program. And what we found is that, almost all of them applied to multiple proposals every year after year. And I mean, this one is ridiculous. I think this is a false positive. This person was just, I don't know what this person was doing. There's no way you can apply to 100 in a year, but this is pretty real. I know companies, and some of our companies apply for like 10, 20, like somewhere in there, in that range every year. That's how you get really good at it. You get a lot of experience doing it. You get a lot of feedback from various places, and you give yourself the best chance of winning. So you have to be absolutely gritty as an entrepreneur to go after these things. The second one is you really need to show the right credentials to make this happen, right? There's a lot of applicants out there, and for someone reading different proposals, sometimes they can tell the difference between the two. And sometimes what they'll only go by is like, all right, who are the people doing it? And can I feel more confident about one team pulling it off versus another team pulling it off? And that's where if you have people with good credentials on your team, even if they're advisors, even if they're consultants, it's always going to increase your chances of getting the money. Now, researchers are great to have because of two reasons. One is because they have the credentials and people kind of have some trust that they've done this before or whatever, and they can do it again or whatever. And they're supposed to be well educated. They're supposed to be, the cream of the crop, if you will. And so it's like, from the agency side, it's like they can show them off as like, oh yeah, I funded a company that has an MIT researcher on it or whatever, right? So that's always great. But the second reason that most people don't understand is that for the agencies, they also have to make sure that the recipient is a good steward of taxpayer dollars. And so they cannot have, they will not fund entities and organizations where they feel that this organization has no system for managing money, has no experience with managing government money, which is important, and they're going to go off and buy a Ferrari for themselves or whatever, right? And so having professors or whatever on the team sometimes gives confidence because they're used to getting grant funding for their day jobs at universities. And so the government agencies feel that there's less risk in giving them money because they've known to be good stewards of grant dollars or federal dollars. And so if you don't have someone like this on your team, you've got to be able to put yourself forward as someone who comes across as really mature to be able to manage those sorts of taxpayer dollars. And so that goes into how well you prepare your documentation and how it looks in comparison to something that might be submitted by someone with a scientist on their team, like a researcher on their team, right? That's where working with someone who's done this again before helps you kind of look the right mold to win one of these things. And the last one is, I kept saying this, right? Get help from anywhere that you can, and you've got to just execute really, really well. This is where, most investors will tell you that what separates good teams from not so good teams is how well a team executes on an idea. An idea is worth squat, right? It's all about execution always. Ideas, people have 10 ideas a day. Some are good, some are bad, of course, but it's always about how well you execute on something. And we tell this to all our customers as well. We can guide you all day, all night, or whatever, but unless you execute well on these things, we can't do it for you. And nobody can do it for you. No consultant out there can do your job as a founder. And someone who knows the ins and outs of your idea, of your technology, and how you're going to execute. So you've got to be super tight with the paperwork you produce and be accurate with stuff and timelines. like deadlines, for example. You cannot come in, 1 week before the deadline and say, all right, now we're going to do this, and then figure out that, oh, well, this is way too much work. And then just give up and do something else. That's just that's the sign of a founder who is really struggling with time management, which at that point then is going to be really hard for anybody to get convinced that they'll be able to pull off a project that has hard timelines on it as well. All right, and then finally, yeah, this is my contact if you guys want to get in touch, if at all, and the websites that I just mentioned to you, where we have our search engines that you can look up. If you're a small business, go to TurboSBIR.com. That's the best place to get everything that you need. If you're not a small business, if you're a nonprofit or a researcher, academic, whatever, go to TurboGrant. That's the right place for you guys to find stuff. But our search engine is the same on both sides. There's the same filters on both sides. So you'll be able to get the same tools, resources, and our help on both these sites. It's just one's designed for academics, one's designed for entrepreneurs. And other than that, so Afi, we can either get into Q&A, or if you want to pause recording, I can quickly go through the sample to show people what a good proposal looks like.
Yeah, we'll have to go into Q&A since we're, just a couple of minutes out of time, but thank you so much, Rupak, that was great. I learned a lot, I imagine everyone is furiously taking notes, and we got a few questions. Yes, the recording will be sent out actually over the next few days. We'll also send out these links, and any other helpful resources. Since we have just a couple of minutes, I'm gonna, ask Rupak to answer the questions that are applicable to everyone. So one question, furiously taking notes, Jackson. Yeah, one question that came up was, are registrations similar year to year for SBIR grants?
They are. It's the same ones. There's DUNS, SAM, and SBIR.gov, which is applicable for all agencies. You need these three for everything. SAM needs to get updated every year. So just be on top of that. It needs to get renewed every year. But other than that, it's the same three for all agencies. And then agencies have their own registrations, but those are almost instantaneous. You can do it pretty much the day off if you wanted to. But yeah, a week doesn't harm. But they are, yeah, once you do them, you get them out of the way, you're set,
Great. And then, another question that came through was do you put, or is it the same proposal or rewriting and tailoring? So if you're doing 20 a year, do you have any kind of thoughts on that?
I can tell you that 80% of all those are the same. It's just what even professors will do. They essentially, create a copy of the previous proposal and then edit whatever's the required, nuances of the solicitation at the time. So I can tell you that they're all very, very similar. So it's just getting into the habit of applying to lots of these by continuously tweaking what you have.
And that actually follows up with one more question I'll take from the audience, and just everyone, I'll pop in my email too. Feel free to email me direct if you have additional questions we can answer. And this one was just on, the broad range of learning for EdTech. So, do you have suggestions on framing proposals, searching out, framing, all of that as it comes to particular technology?
Can you explain that question a little bit more?
I should say, like, based on the thematic area, right, of who's being serviced or supported, there's different applications for EdTech. How would a founder differentiate when they're writing a proposal?
So if I'm understanding correctly, differentiating like where the impact needs to be made.
Yes.
Is that the question? Okay, cool.
Yes.
So typically every technology usually has a sweet spot of the audience. It's either an age window, a demographic in like that age window is the right window, or it's someone who's already enrolled in certain kinds of programs and they are the only ones who would benefit from that tech. Or if the tech is something that works with hardware only, then there's certain demographics that might be the wrong fit because they have no clue about how to use hardware, or they have no money to buy hardware or whatever. So that's kind of how you would scope out who would be the right target audience for your tech. And that's super important. It's much, much more important to show good educational outcomes for a specific demographic, even if it's not the bigger market. that's for grants and contracts, it's more important to show outcomes because they care more about the benefit to society as opposed to you making like, you know, $1 billion company or whatever. That investors care more about that, you know. And so that would be my suggestion, to really kind of dig into what your technology can really fit in terms of demographic or specific population or you know, area of occupation or whatever.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time and this wealth of information. I appreciate everyone who joined, all your questions. We'll try to follow up with some answers for folks who didn't get answers. And, you know, it was great to, you know, have you all joining us, and we'll be having more, put my email in there. We'll be having more events and activities in the next few months. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Sophie.
All right. Bye-bye.